Hi there, this is the Everyday Economist, and this video will be discussing about why I believe we are currently in a great recession of the year 2022, and why all factors considered relating to oil prices, the energy crisis we are seeing, inflation, and the low rate of employee participation that we're seeing across industries, not just in the US, but in Europe, is a recipe for disaster for this country, and we're going to see the stock market continue to crash to record lows at this current pace. Let's look at why that is and how we could potentially get out of it, if at all. We see the current headline across all major news sites is that oil prices are hitting record highs. I did a video previous to this that explains why this is and how this could be resolved quickly given the consideration of factors that diplomats are making with Iran, Venezuela, and now Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states of trying to pump out more oil to put this price down. Now, why is oil important? Obviously, it's important because it's a major commodity that's used everywhere. But another reason it's important is because it's part of the inflation calculation and part of the factor of how the Federal Reserve goes about lowering interest rates. This is the CPI. Jerome Powell every day or every week looks at this number and gets it updated before it's published to the public monthly per quarter also, where we see what contributing costs of goods are bringing inflation up. And we see that transportation is close to 20%, so a huge portion of what the Federal Reserve says is their measure of inflation. So if everything else goes down, but we have 20% of the basket going up at record highs, we haven't seen oil prices like this since 2014, Jerome Powell is not going to lower interest rates. And what happens when he doesn't lower interest rates? The market's going to continue to crash, especially in tech stocks or high growth stocks. And that's what we've been seeing. The death cross we saw a few days ago on QQQ, which is an ETF for all the largest tech companies, is an indication of this. We're seeing that Jerome Powell is not going to lower interest rates anytime soon, because I did get a few comments in my email saying, well, there's a war in Ukraine and this might be good for the market because the government, every time we have a war, the economy rallies and we see the stock market rally as well. And that's true, but in this case, this is a unique war. America is getting all the cost of war without the benefits, because in a war like Iraq or Afghanistan, you're hiring people, factories are opening, and everyone gets a job. But here, America has to give weapons to Ukraine for free, and they have to face the repercussions of oil without getting any of the benefits in terms of actually conscripting soldiers and employing people and making weapons. The weapons they're giving to Ukraine are not the top of the line F-35 jets that we really need to produce and ramp up the economy. They're older, actually Russian-made MiG fighters and really ancient weaponry we're giving them. So there's no economic benefit in that sense. And we're seeing the inflation metric show that as well. And a question you might be having is, why are we having this inflation? Because if you remember, once COVID hit, the Federal Reserve went crazy with the money printing. That's why we have inflation. It's not that because of the war in Ukraine, all of a sudden we have inflation. Sure, that makes it worse, but the root cause is the central bankers, specifically the Federal Reserve, who put this country and the rest of the world in this mess. Look at this. 40% of all US dollars in existence were printed in the last 12 months. And the reason for this is a geopolitical reason that happened in 2014 because of China, and they're not buying our debt anymore. So the Federal Reserve had to make up the difference between what they were spending and what they were getting from China. But China took it down in 2015, 2014, and the Federal Reserve had to make up the difference. And they used the economic recovery plan after COVID as an excuse to print this crazy amounts of money to make up the difference, with the smoke screen of saying this is because we need this for COVID, this is all for COVID. And you might need a little bit for COVID like we did after 2008, you need some money in the system, but 40% of all US dollars in existence? Let's look at how much money they printed more specifically, and really who is behind that. This is the most influential person in America. This is the person who's behind it. He controls the money supply. Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Don't forget this face the next time you go to the voting box, because he's the person who controls how much your investments are worth, how much your retirement is worth, how much your salary is worth in real terms and in terms of purchasing powers, how much money you're paying for groceries and inadvertently for gas at the pump, because you could say, well, it's all supply driven. Not necessarily. It's also money supply driven, specifically inflation. So yes, we could have a lack of supply from Russia in terms of oil, and that pushes up the price, but you could say that's 50 or 75% of the price that's increased. The remainder is from the inflation relative to the money supply that you're paying at the pump, and it's because of Jerome Powell. So don't forget this face. Now let's go back and look at the money supply again. So here's the money supply, and this is the amount of money they printed in 2020 because of COVID, apparently. And look, you could not know anything about economics, not know even what supply and demand is. But you look at this graph and you say, wow, look at this, something happened here. This doesn't look right. It was going up normally, at least in some reasonable amount, and then it went up a crazy level as a response to the economic downturn. And I got a lot of questions in my previous videos that I did on this topic saying, well, we did print money after 2008. We had record amounts of printing in 2008, and we got out of it fine, right? Well, let's look. Forget 2008 for a second, but look at this graph. It puts it in comparison to the wars America has fought. The amount of money we printed because of COVID and the infrastructure bill and also all the checks, it's $12 trillion. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, we obviously need money in the system, but do we need $12 trillion money in the system as a response to COVID? Because all the wars we fought since World War II, including Afghanistan and Iraq, cost America $9.9 trillion. So in essence, you printed $3 trillion more to fight COVID. Is COVID that bad of an enemy compared to the Nazis in World War II? Iraq, Afghanistan, the Viet Cong, the Korean War, and all these wars we fought? Isn't this an overkill reaction? And I get these comments every once in a while saying, well, listen, we printed money in 2008 and we turned out fine. Well, let's look at 2008. This is the money we printed in 2008, and you're right, it was a lot of money. Look at this. We went in a recession, and the Federal Reserve came out and they did, as they did in 2020, they printed a bunch of money to get the system and the economy rolling and to grease the gears. And you could, again, not know anything about economics and see that, wow, literal vertically we went up in terms of the money supply that we had in the system. Now, keep this graph in mind. I want you to memorize this graph. Just remember this spike. And you might be saying, wow, this is crazy. We printed so much money in 2008. And you know what? We kind of turned out fine, if you want to define fine however you want. But look at this graph. Just remember this spike right now. And I'm going to compare it to the graph we have currently in 2020 and 2021. Remember this spike. Let me show you this. Remember that spike in the last graph? That's that little speed bump over here. The reason it looks so minuscule is because look at how much money we printed in 2020 in response to COVID. So you think that that was bad? This is like a million 2008s, a million financial recessions. Isn't that an overkill response? Is COVID a million times worse than the recession we faced in 2008? It was worse, but was it this much worse that the Federal Reserve had to come out and print this much money? And you might be asking yourself, why this overkill reaction? And the answer is because China in 2014 stopped buying US debt. What does that mean in lay terms? It means that they didn't send the trade surplus they got from being the manufacturer of the world, the money they make from that, the profit they make from that, from the day they joined the WTO, which was 2000 to 2014, they used to send that profit and buy treasury bills at the United States and used to park their money in US banks because it was a safe way to do things. But in 2014, Xi Jinping, who's more hawkish, said, wait a minute, let's not do that. I'm going to take that money and the profit I'm making from trade and actually invest it in my own people, in my own economy, and my own military. And that's why we saw the Belt and Road Initiative, where China is going around to countries in the Middle East and Africa and Latin America, buying 100-year leases on their airports and military ports, and to say that they're going to have control over their trade infrastructure militarily, but also economically. So that's why. When the money didn't come in from China, the Federal Reserve was panicking from 2014 to 2020, and they say, we need an excuse to print this money. And then the virus came along, and they say, wait a minute, this is a good smokescreen to say, well, we're going to need to print money to save the economy, but let's use this excuse to print all the money we need in the absence of China. And that's why after 2015, politicians all of a sudden became hawkish towards China. We saw Trump, both from the left and the right, everyone started becoming hawkish on China. Not because China was doing anything different. They were doing all the horrible things they were always doing, but they weren't playing ball, and that's why they got hawkish. But there's more to this. Let's see. So another comment I get, oh, well, listen, it's going to be as bad as the 70s. We had a stagflation there. We had a recession. We had inflation. We had high unemployment. But it's going to be much worse than the 1970s, I believe, because the factors that this country is facing and the economic engines that we had in those days no longer exist. Primarily, we're no longer exporting like we used to, and North America specifically is no longer the main exporter that they used to be in the 70s. China has taken over. Let me show you. This is the graph of 1999. I mean, obviously in the 70s it was more than this. All the blue countries are countries at this time that had a trade surplus with the United States, meaning that the United States was their largest trading partner at 1999. All the blue countries, even Russia, was our largest. We used to buy the most from us. And this is the year, 1 year before China joined the WTO. And you can see, well, you can say in the 1970s, this is what got America out of the recession. We sold our goods to the rest of the world, and we could get out of that recession. We could dig ourselves out of it. 1999, well, let's look at it today. The entire world has gone on to dancing to China's music. America is no longer the top trading partner of the majority of the world. It's actually China. So what's going to save America now? That's why I'm concerned, and that's why I'm saying we're going to head for a great recession, if not depression, amounting with the energy crisis we're facing, record number of inflation, and the mismanagement of the dollar and their trade policies, and handing it on a silver platter to China. Who's going to save us now? God only knows. And this is why I'm worried about the stock market and the fate of North America and the Western economies as we know it. And if you're interested in discussing and learning about more of these topics in greater detail, I highly recommend you watch this video from November of last year, which is also the video where I predicted last year that we're going to have a war after the Olympics, and that prediction has come true. But in this video, it's 2 hours and 30 minutes long. I explain everything from start to finish. That's why it's long. And I explain it in lay terms. Very simple. You don't have to have any understanding in economics or finance to appreciate this video, but if you do, great. You'll learn more from it. In this video, I explained the Great Reset, the tensions with Russia, but also the focus of this video is why the relationship between China and the United States turned a watershed moment in 2014 when they stopped playing ball in terms of buying our debt and exporting their money, and how that is putting America and China on two different trajectories where China might actually take over the world economically and maybe later militarily. And that's the reason why I recommend you watch this video, is because many people are not talking about this. They're not awake to it. They're not realizing what's at play here. And no one has actually connected the economic factors to the geopolitical as far as I've seen. And this video aims to do that. So you don't have to watch all of it in one go. You can skip parts. It's not like a book where you have to see it from start to finish to understand what's going on, although it helps. But if you found this video useful, I think this video will be more interesting to you because it explains everything in great detail. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.